Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jay Nichols from Child Care Aware of America. Thank you for joining us for this. We're going to use this opportunity to provide all of you with just a brief summary of the recent child care legislation that Senator Patty Murray of Washington and Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia recently introduced, and also highlight what Child Care Aware of America is doing at the national level as well as at the state level, in particular with in the state of Washington on promoting and trying to advance this legislation. And again, my name's Jay and I represent Child Care Aware of America. Joining me is Ryan Preco of the Child Care Aware of Washington. He's been Child Care Washington has been a very strong partner and ally of ours for years, and Ryan, in just a short amount of time, is going to highlight the work that the state of Washington's been doing, including a recent event with Senator Patty Murray herself. Before we begin, I just want to point out to all of you on your screens, you should have the option to see a chat box, and we request that any questions about any specific questions about our national approach or what we're doing in the state of Washington, would you please type them in the chat box, and then Ryan and I will do our best to answer them. As always, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube page later on today. So, want to begin to highlight what got us to the Murray-Scott legislation that we, along with a number of other allies and through coalitions and organizations, were working on for quite some time. It's important to, what led to this new legislation and great opportunity is what we identified as was a child care need. Obviously, it is vital to a healthy economy. Nearly $500 billion it generates annually. So you see a critical benefit. However, over the last decade, child care costs have skyrocketed. And for many families, particularly low-income and working-class families, as well as middle-class families, child care has become unaffordable. It exceeds, it exceeds a monthly mortgage or what a family spends on food and transportation. In a number of states, the cost of care exceeds tuition at a public four-year university or college. And most importantly, due to the high rise in child care costs, it does put a family puts a family at economic risk. In particular, especially with regards to holding or maintaining a good job, because they're unable to find quality care or afford quality care in their area. So that obviously, with that, and when you also factor in current federal benefits only reach a very small percentage of families that rely on care. With that need, it helped us to advance and work with Congress on coming up with what would be viewed as a way to not only address the need to rising costs, but also to find ways to improve training of teachers and finding how to set better payment rates, how to reach so many children and families that currently do not have access to quality care, whether or not they can afford it, or if they also live in what's known as a child care desert, especially in rural areas. So Senator Patty Murray and Congressman Bobby Scott this fall released a proposal to try to address those questions. In particular, as you see, it would probably one of the bigger highlights is what you see on the screen. It would basically turn the child care and development block grant into a full entitlement. A massive amount of new funding just in the first few years. It would really put a great emphasis on improving quality of care, not only at centers, but also in home-based, family-friendly settings, and also in settings during what are called non-traditional hours, which is usually early evening around 6, 7 o'clock to early in the morning. But in addition to that, it also, as I mentioned, puts a great amount of emphasis on increasing training and compensation, and working to ensure that ensuring that child care workers are paid a decent living wage. In other words, to try to put it on parity with what educators in the K through 12 arena, their compensation benefits and wages. But it also, you see there's a Head Start benefit to try to expand to full day, full year programming, and also an effort to help establish payment provider levels that reflect higher wages. So far, this legislation on the House side is pushing near 100 co-sponsors. I believe it's roughly in the mid-20s on the Senate side. This legislation is really, it's a vision, as I mentioned earlier, and it would make CCDBG transition it from a block grant into an entitlement. This would be an incremental. This legislation would represent incremental change to help fulfill a vision for quality, affordable child care for every family. You can see, you mentioned over $100 billion in new funding. That would just be within the first 3 years. As far as tiers of eligibility are concerned, the floor would be set at 150%, and the state would have flexibility to raise eligibility, and a sliding scale would kick in as far as cost between 7 and 10%, and eligibility would be based on state median income. So, what does this mean for the Child Care Resource and Referral Network? These have been questions that have been asked for our organization since the legislation has been introduced. The Murray-Scott bill actually has provisions included that put with specific reference to the CCR&R network, and basically calling upon the CCR&R network to kind of relying on them to help build and enhance the system. And how would they do that? Well, they would take, in many cases, they would take existing ideas that are currently under CCDBG, including through consumer education, through data collection, through obviously building quality partnerships, help establish partnerships with what we call parent resource centers, and of course, if time allowed and if capacity were possible, to work directly with families on helping them identify appropriate and affordable provider provider assistance. The infrastructure obviously would be CCR&R infrastructure would be greatly enhanced under this bill, and so states would be encouraged to work with the CCR&R network on both the local and regional levels, and yes, funding in areas where this type of network is either non-existent or very small. Money authorized on this program could be used to help build that type of network. And so obviously a major benefit for CCR&Rs, and that obviously for us is is the part of this Murray-Scott legislation that we've been promoting. Now, how has Child Care Aware of America been promoting this legislation? And forgive me, unfortunately, there's a few sirens if you guys hear sirens in the background, my apologies, should pass through momentarily. So how is Child Care Aware of America promoting this legislation? And as I mentioned, this is step one in a likely long process. It's unlikely that this legislation will get much traction in this Congress. Hopefully, in the years to come, we can continue to build support for it. As you know, it took us 18 years to get for a reauthorization of CCDBG back in 2014. So in the meantime, how are we at Child Care Aware of America? How are we working to promote this legislation, and both at the national level and at the state level? Nationally, in addition to hosting meetings like this one and using our social media capabilities, we also are using what's called our Child Care Works movement. that we launched last year. Right now, we are primarily focused in 4 states. We're hoping to build out to hopefully 7 or 8 next year, and continue in the years to come to continue to strengthen our mission here. And what we are currently doing is we work with states to kind of help build what are called these digital action centers and help strengthen their advocacy efforts. But our goal is also to help build community coalition building. What we would like to do, what we are doing is we are using kind of linking, okay, federal legislation, what's in both something like this as well as with something with, funding with regards to the federal budget. How do we link that federal legislation to state legislation and other state advocacy efforts? Some of this work is, involves letters to the editor campaigns, or writing op-eds, or petitions, or going on Twitter, using designing hashtags. But most importantly, it's done to help develop and enhance partnerships, and then build a strong advocacy movement throughout this country. For example, we just this year alone, we worked in coalition with the other child advocates to try to push child care in the Virginia governor's debates. We intend to next year likely being involved, making child care, hopefully having child care be a part of the national discussion in both congressional races, as well as hopefully through a number of governor's races as well. And that's what we've been doing really to promote the Child Care for Working Families Act. We are through this campaign and through this movement, we are and obviously working with our CCR&R partners, we are using it to build the message that this legislation would provide a great boost for child care for low-income and working families. We've been able to, like we said, through social media, through direct meetings, and we're hoping we are hoping to have this legislation, as well as child care in general, be part of our national conversation, especially heading into the elections of next year. So that's what we've been working on through our national movement, which works with a number of states. We also intend, Child Care of America, in the months to come, we will have numerous opportunities, or we will utilize new opportunities to promote this, including congressional briefings. We have our national symposium next spring, and obviously this legislation will be one of our, for those of you that have ever come to Washington to meet with your legislators, this will be considered one of our big asks to continue to build support for the Murray-Scott bill. So we are going to, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to continue to push for this bill and continue to build support, and hopefully even before the end of this Congress, which is December of next year, hopefully we can get something, whether it be a hearing or even who knows, a potential markup of this legislation. Any consideration of this legislation by Congress is our goal. We are really hoping that we can make this a bipartisan effort. As of right now, only Democrats have signed on, but we are hoping that some Republicans will be willing to support this, and if we can, it would, the chances of this bill moving forward would certainly improve. So, in the months and the year ahead, we will continue to for Child Care of America, our national organization based in Arlington. This will remain a top priority. We will continue to actually share any news and information relevant to this bill, and we will, we will, keep you informed. So that is. I took this use this opportunity to explain what we're doing at the national level. My colleague Ryan is actually now going to spend a few moments to summarize what Child Care Aware of Washington has done directly with Senator Murray, who is the main co-sponsor of the Senate version of the Child Care for Working Families Act. So Ryan, whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jay. First, I just want to say that we feel completely fortunate that we have Senator Murray in our state. She's a former preschool teacher herself. She championed these issues when she was a state senator locally, and so it's made it really easy to engage her office as a federal champion around these issues. And so I just want to emphasize that, her thinking behind this bill didn't really come out of nowhere. This is something that we've been talking to her about for years now. We've been engaging her around an idea like this for a long time. We've used events like, Child Care Aware of America's annual policy symposium. We do in-state events with her. We connect with her office around particular policy issues that might arise in the state around child care, just to build that relationship over the years, so that when the time was right, which she felt was now, we were positioned to have a lot of influence over the language of this bill. And that's what we worked on a lot over the summer, was just meeting directly with all of her staff, from committee staff to her direct office staff, giving them feedback on the ideas that she had and the priorities she wanted to push. Initially, this was much more of an affordability bill, at least the initial language I saw. And through conversations we had with her, we made it became a much more comprehensive bill that also focused a lot on not just quality improvement for child care providers, but also wages for child care providers. And we were really happy to see an emphasis on that come out of the bill. After working with her through the summer to get this draft of the bill that was then released in September, we pivoted right away towards trying to raise awareness of the bill and coordinating with her office to do so. And one of the first ideas we had was to do a tour of child care programs in state that she could use to not only increase media awareness about the bill, but also hear directly from child care providers and the families they serve about aspects of the bill that they really like, or things that maybe should be emphasized more. And that happened a couple weeks ago. We went to, I think, 4 different programs over 3 days. We had media coverage at all of them. The senator was very open to ideas and dialogue. Parents and providers were able to talk a lot at each of these events and give her a lot more ideas, or a lot of, really a lot of kudos about the things that she's emphasizing in this bill. And we also use it as an opportunity to bring in key allies that could be strong voices for this bill locally. Folks from law enforcement, brain researchers, economists, military leaders, those kind of partners who are, the unusual suspects that are very supportive of this bill from their own perspective, and provided a lot of good content to the media members that were there. And so we're off and running in support of this bill. We're working closely with Child Care Works to move this legislation forward. The Action Center that Child Care Works provides, I think, is going to be a key tool for us as we move more into engaging other members of our delegation around this bill and trying to build support for it amongst the senator's colleagues. So a big thank you to Child Care Works for everything they do to support us on that side. And we're also starting to brainstorm some additional ideas we can do to support this bill. And one of the ones that we're working on the most right now is engaging the business community around it, engaging the major employers that we have in the state. And it was kind of perfect timing that at the same time we were working on this bill, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation released a report that was really what we were looking for. It's, the nation's primary voice for business. The report was written by the American Enterprise Institute, which is, a pro-business think tank. And they really look at it from an economic perspective that we need to invest more in childcare. We need to start separating pre-K from care and just, come to the fact that everything that happens before age 5, before a child enters the K-12 system, is pre-K, and we just need to make sure that they're in quality environments during all of that time. And so that was a great message coming from a key messenger. We took that report. I know that the senator has also engaged the foundation around their report, and they're going to work on some messaging partnerships. But we took that report and we unpacked it And we've created a whole material toolkit and an employer engagement plan about it. And if anybody wants to look at those documents, you can find them at our advocacy webpage at wa.childcareaware.org. And then up at the top, we have an About Us tab. Under that is our advocacy page. And if you go there, you'll see all of our documents linked up. You'll also see a blurb about the Senator's bill. But we're out taking that toolkit to local chambers and rotaries. We're using some partners that we have to reach some high-level business leaders in the state, like the Association of Washington Businesses and the Business Roundtable. They have a lot of influence in the state around public policy from a business perspective, and we're trying to get them on board with this movement for childcare, not only in our state, but also in support of the Senator's bill. And then finally, we're also working with the authors of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to potentially bring them out to our state once our own legislative session starts up, and have them come speak in front of our fiscal committees and our policy committees, in addition to the work that they're doing to provide their messaging on the national level in support of this bill. So initially, we provided a lot of feedback on this bill and tried to move it in a direction that was more comprehensive. I think that we accomplished that. We're just kind of wrapping up our initial media blitz to try to bring attention to this bill, and now we're moving into engaging the business community, engaging key partners and allies, in strategically engaging our federal delegation to try to build support for it. And so that's all I have, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Ryan, thank you for that. That was great. And again, for those of you participating, if you have any questions, we strongly encourage you to please ask them via the chat box that you should have available on your computer screens. We do have a couple that have come through. The first question, one participant has asked if the slides will be shared, and yes, they will. They'll be posted on our website shortly after the conclusion of this presentation. Another question that was asked is if there were any incentives. Does the Murray-Scott bill provide any incentives to CCDF state administrators to kind of use and enhance their current CCR&R system rather than create a new system? Yes, that they are strongly encouraged to, if they have an existing network, to build and strengthen that network. And for states that don't either have a very small R&R network or don't have one existing at all, the bill does allow that money can be used to build a new system, but if you have an existing system in place, then the Murray-Scott bill strongly encourages states to work to strengthen the existing system. Obviously, don't create something new or a competing system, but the bill itself is it puts a great emphasis on two key factors with R&Rs: to build the existing network, and, if necessary, create one if there is a local or regional networks are lacking. Sorry, bear with me for 1 minute. Just had another question come through, and the question is around, actually, Ryan, the question's for you. Our participant says that she is a student parent support specialist at a community college in Seattle, and she was wondering how this bill could assist student parents. And she acknowledges that it looks like assistance in the state of Washington is limited to, I guess, a kind of degree that a parent wants to pursue. And so the questioner is asking, will it support parents pursuing non-professional certificate programs?
Well, I don't think that the Senator's bill dives into that weeds, and just some background for everyone outside of the state of Washington. We have maybe the most strictest rules for students accessing child care subsidies in the nation. We restrict the kind of degrees that you have to be going towards in order to get it. It has to be a degree that pays a high enough wage. So, for instance, anyone going for an early childhood degree isn't eligible for it. And we also require, I believe, at least 20 hours a week of work in addition to being a full-time student and raising a family in order to get child care subsidies. So that's an issue that we're working on here in the state. We're going to try to actually push legislation this year to expand that. But I will say that there is just a lot more money going into child care subsidies through this bill. I mean, eligibility is doubled, and the money follows that eligibility. And so states will have much more incentives and capacity to serve more people because the funding will be available. And so I think rules like you'll find in Washington, where it's very, severely restricted for a segment of the population to access subsidies, I think you'll see all of those kind of loosen up across the nation if this bill were to pass, because the money that comes with it is so large.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's also worth highlighting that the legislation is also proposing to help, obviously through strengthening, through training and and compensation. Included in that provision could be opportunities. One is for a potential, I guess, like a scholarship to help cover costs of college, college tuition. But there is, the bill does kind of leave it open for states to help cover costs of with regards to for college students. So Ryan, thank you for your response. And again, still encouraging everybody to if they have any questions, please ask them. And again, we got another question about this slide deck. Yes, we will be providing the slide deck, and it will be available to everyone participating on this webinar shortly after we conclude. Got an interesting question here. It's how does this bill compare to the bipartisan tax bill known as the PACE Act, which is sponsored by Congressman Kevin Yoder and Republican Congressman from Kansas, and Congresswoman Murphy, Democrat from Florida. There's also a Senate version of the bill sponsored by Senators Angus King of Maine and Richard Burr of North Carolina. And the question is, how does this compare to that bill? Well, the PACE Act is, it proposes, and obviously all talk right now is centered on tax reform, which Congress is currently working on, and they will likely spend at least the remainder of this year to try to possibly pass something. The Congressman Yoder and Congresswoman Murphy bill, what that proposes to do is to take an existing tax credit, which is called the Child Care and Dependency Tax Credit. It would not only expand eligibility and expand limits on basically right now with the PACE Act is that this tax credit is not refundable, and the proposal is to not only make it refundable but also increase its potential benefit of being refundable and and try to reach more working families. That legislation has a lot of bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. The hope is that and it will likely be done possibly via tax reform as opposed to a standalone measure. The hope is that if tax reform can get done, that there is an opportunity to actually use parts of the Yoder-Murphy bill to try to expand this dependency tax credit, which would obviously be a benefit to many working families. So that was really thank you for that question. And another question here. We have another question with regards to how would the bill address the issue of child care worker wages, and this kind of all goes back to as everyone is aware, wages for child care workers are very low, considering the critical work they provide and support they provide for young children and their families. This is all tied back to supporting and strengthening the child care workforce through training. In addition to training, it's through compensation. A lot of this would be tied to credentialing of child care workers in an effort to try to bring, as I mentioned earlier on in this presentation, try to bring the wages more on the line of what many educators in the K through 12 system benefit from. How specifically would that be done? Well, it would vary obviously in different states, but it is, the discussion for many years is that while you continue to try to build and strengthen the child care programs themselves, you also need to maintain a strong child care workforce, and there are just many instances of many educators, child care workers who eventually, many of them with families of their own to support, have to move on to some other profession because they are not earning a wage that's going to support their families. So this bill is proposing to help through education, through credentialing, training, to help bring child care workforce earnings more on parity with the K through 12 system. And with that, Ryan, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, but again, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available shortly, as well as the slides, which will be posted on our website under our public policy department. Ryan, if you had any closing thoughts? Oh, may have lost Ryan. Okay, so want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Wish all of you a great weekend. Enjoy Halloween with your kids. It's coming up in a few days, and for most of you, many of us, as we transition to fall weather, enjoy the cooler weather before it starts to get cold. And as always, I am available for any questions you may have. Feel free to either reach out to either myself or Ryan, and wish all of you a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.